All right, good morning, everyone. This October 11th meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by a video conference pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, as extended on July 16th of 2022. This meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating remotely via Zoom as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all phones and devices. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use their full name or who acts inappropriately. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is pursuant to law. This meeting will feature public comment. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. If you're not able to participate in the remote meeting, you may also submit comments to the Coastal Resilience Coordinator, Vince Murphy, to be read into the meeting record. His email is vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov. Confirming member access, I am Mary Longacre, Chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Gary Beller.
Here.
Sarah Boyce.
Here.
Peter Brace.
Here.
Rachel Freeman.
Here.
Ian Golding.
Yes.
Jen Carberg.
Here.
And I don't see our remaining members, but we do have a quorum. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Vince Murphy.
Here.
And we do not have anticipated speakers for this agenda. So we will go to the first agenda item. The minutes for September 13th and 27th were just provided to members this morning. Probably have not had a chance to review them. So with your consent, we will move that to the next meeting agenda. Any objections to that? No. The next item on the agenda is the appointment of a representative from the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee to the Nantucket and Mitigation Harbors Action, Action Plan Update Committee. There was in the packet the committee charge and the membership proposed. Did anyone have any questions on that? And do we have anyone interested in volunteering to be our representative to that committee? Sarah?
I'm potentially interested if, I don't know who else might be interested too. I was wondering, I know the charge that Jeff sent out didn't say when the meeting dates were planned yet. I didn't know if there was any update, if you'd heard anything, Vince, from that, because that might make a difference.
I think the intent is to get the volunteers and then have them set the meeting time and date at a convenient schedule.
And I'm potentially interested as well.
Okay, Peter. Just a moment, Peter. Joanna Roach is joining the meeting at 10:05. Go ahead, Peter.
I guess I'm being a little crafty here because I'm hoping that the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board appoints somebody else from our board to the meeting and to the committee and not me. So I might be willing to serve if Sarah doesn't want to do it.
Okay. Joanna, you want to give us a quick hello?
Hi.
And
Sorry, I was like,
we are on the discussion item for the appointing the representative to the Nantucket and Mitigation Harbors Action Plan Update Committee.
okay.
Sarah and Peter have both expressed interest. Any other interested parties at this point? Any questions on what the participation in that committee might involve that perhaps Vince could answer? Peter?
Vince, is it really only once a month? Because in the creation of it, and then the first update, they really met a lot. Like I think it was like twice a month.
If I can, Mary.
Yeah, go ahead.
So he's following Jeff is following the 2009 plan creation. I wasn't even on island. I wasn't even thinking about moving to America at that point. So that's a question for Jeff. But from what I understand is this is still open for debate. This is a suggestion that they might meet once a month, so that once the membership of 9, this is another committee of 9 like CRAC used to be, that once the membership is in place, then that committee of 9 will decide the meeting frequency, dates, times, that kind of stuff, if they'll set a time or if they'll just meet ad hoc. It could be anything. But at the moment, that's Jeff's idea, not anything more than that. It could easily change. And it will change at the committee's direction.
Thank you, Vince. I'll note that Matt Fee joined the meeting at 10:06. And Matt, want to give us a quick hello?
Hello, my camera doesn't work, otherwise you would see my face. So I will have to just speak up. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Matt. So we had, for Matt's benefit, both Sarah Boyce and Peter Brace express interest in being the CRAC representative to the Nantucket and Matticat Harbors Action Plan Update Committee. Do we want to go ahead and make an appointment at this time?
Are you looking for a motion, Mary?
Vince, you're going to have to remind, we have not done this before. Do we?
Okay.
Do we need a motion or do we do a vote just to pick one or the other?
If somebody, it's a nomination system, so that if, say, Sarah's expressed interest or Peter's expressed interest, if I don't want to color this anyway, but if somebody wants to nominate someone of those or anybody else in the committee, they can, and then seconds and then votes, and then the vote is what it is. Just put it out there. It'd be great to have a decision today, I think personally, as we'd be one of the first committees to have made the decision. We do need to have a member appointed by the end of the month. We have one more meeting where we could do that, but it still would be nice to get it done today, in my opinion.
Okay, Ian, you had a hand up?
I did. Thank you, Mary. So in the Conservation Commission in the past, when more than one member has expressed interest, they've been asked to leave the room while the remaining members vote on it. So I don't know how we do that here. Should we appoint them jointly? And I don't know what to say.
Yeah, and if they left, I'll note Christy Kickham has joined the meeting. It's 10:09. So we would have a quorum if they both left. That would be my concern. Sarah, comment?
Yeah, actually, I had a question sort of related to what Ian just said. Is there a way that we could jointly do it and kind of share? I mean, if Peter feels really strongly about doing it so that the Shellfish Advisory Board has a separate representative, then I'm okay with that.
I'll point out there are proposed 3 at-large positions as well. So it's certainly possible that both of you could serve. The question is, whose interest would you be representing? So we would be appointing someone to represent the interests of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee.
Mary, I'm just going to note that Bruce Mandel has a hand up.
And
Peter?
I fully believe that we'll be appointing somebody. I mean, if we're on the list, we have to appoint somebody. I'm just going to say that if I get, appointed today for CRAC, obviously I won't be appointed for SHAB. Someone else will. So.
All right, any further discussion? Matt?
I think they're both very qualified. I don't think we don't lose with either of them. So.
Matt, would you recommend that we use the email voting system that the select board uses?
I don't think so. That's
Okay.
kind of, I don't think it's necessary. I think we pick one and they know we love them both and that neither of them should have their feelings hurt and we're all, and we move on.
Okay. So I think with 2 nominees, the simplest way to do it is to ask each member to vote for one of the nominees. I don't think that nominating one, we just end up nominating the other one as well. I'm not quite sure how that would advance us.
So,
Peter?
if I may.
Yeah.
On the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board, that's how we, for our election of officers every year, the chairman asks, do I have any nominations for chairman? And someone will say a name and we do it like that. And then we take a vote. And then we go to the vice chairman and then secretary. So prior to the meeting, the chairman may, talk to each member and say, are you interested? Or, or he might say between now and the next meeting, think about who you might want to nominate, or if you're willing, because if someone gets nominated, that doesn't mean they're going to do it. I nominate Mary Longy here. And then the chairman says, Mary, are you okay with that? And you might say no. And so then they nominate somebody else like that.
Yeah, in this case, because we have two people that have expressed interest, and I beg your pardon for not anticipating that possibility.
Sure.
I think the simplest way to do it is just one vote for either of those two people from each committee member. So if there are no objections to that system, and Bruce, I do know that you have your hand up, but this is an internal decision. So we'll ask you to wait for public comment, I think.
And Mary, you can do it. You can do it by chat. The vote.
Mhm.
The votes could just come into you or come into Vince.
Well, that is not something I want to do, because there's no record of that, and it's not a feature that we've used, so people may not be familiar with how to send a chat message just to an individual. So I don't think I want to go that way, but thank you for the suggestion. Are we all okay with a voice vote? Anyone objecting to that? I'm not seeing any Sarah?
I was gonna say, if it's a huge deal, like I can just withdraw and have Pete do it. It's not like imperative that I have to be on it. I just thought it would be, I don't know. I don't want it to be a problem for the committee.
I don't see it as a problem at all, but thank you. If you want to nominate Peter, we could take that route, and then we can vote on Peter.
Mary, I have a question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So just help me understand this. If Peter doesn't get this vote, will there still be somebody from Shellfish Advisory on the committee?
Yes.
I'm just confused about that.
Yeah, no, I had a quick conversation with Jeff Carlson, because I pointed out that potentially almost all of those other committees that are appointing representatives could appoint somebody who is a member of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, which would be very confusing. So,
Mary,
yep.
question. By the same token, not that it's our concern, it would raise a question though, would it end up having a quorum of Shellfish and Harbour Advisory Committee, potentially? That's a question for Peter.
No, because we're a 7-member board, so there are 2 of us on there, you'd have to get, yeah, I don't think so.
Good to know, thanks.
But
Okay, so Sarah, did you want to withdraw and nominate Peter? And I'm not asking you to, that seemed to be the tone you were taking.
Yeah, no, I was just, honestly, I hadn't thought this far ahead. I didn't know if there would be anybody else. So I part of me wants to go back and talk to my organization that I work for to see how important it is too. If I know I wouldn't be representing them, but it's a time management issue too. So I was kind of thinking if I volunteered for anyway.
Well,
I'm kind of not sure now.
There are 3 at-large positions available, so everybody has a second chance.
Yeah, sure. I will nominate Pete then. I will withdraw if it makes it easier for everybody.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. It's cleaner. Peter?
Sarah, are you sure? Are you sure, Sarah?
No, but I can apparently go for another seat if I really want to be on it. So if I'm sure later, I can do it. Sorry,
I just didn't want to take your spot if you were looking to do it.
No, I think, kind of, since you're representing CRAC, like anything that we really want to see move forward with the harbor plan, I think that we can use you as a conduit, and I trust you to represent the interests of CRAC.
Okay.
Right, so I'll take a motion from Sarah to nominate
Second Sarah's
Peter.
motion. It's
Thank
Matt.
you, Matt. And so roll call vote, those in favor, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Rachel Freeman,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Christy Kickham,
Aye.
Joanna Roach,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you all. That was an interesting discussion. I'll have to be more prepared next time.
If I might, Mary,
Yes, Vince.
not that this matters in any way, shape or form, but it kind of also is just interesting to note that almost every crack vote is unanimous. I don't remember one that wasn't.
Thank you,
In
Vince.
that case, I'm a nay. No.
Yeah, I'm just pointing out that it gives, this is a good committee that renders well thought out decisions. And I hope this doesn't negatively impact Sarah. But thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Vince. Right, next item on the agenda is a storm update for Hurricanes Fiona and Ian from Vince. Peter?
I just got a text from Joe Topham.
Mhm.
He says Gladys Jibo passed away this morning, so I'm helping Ann, that's his wife, make arrangements. He says he didn't have your cell, so he wanted me to tell you that.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
And I will get him a number. Okay, to the storm update prepared by Vince with help from Morgan Sale.
Yep. This will be brief. So I'm looking at two different storms. We're looking at Fiona and Ian, the two hurricanes that kind of scraped by. So Fiona passed away off out to the east, out at sea. Didn't have much effect, but it caused erosion here. Hurricane Ian also passed away to the in a different direction, though, to the west this time. But it was the rainfall that brought us, that one of the arms that brought us was what is interesting there. So I might start with that one. So the kind of rainfall that Ian brought us up in the northeast up here, I was able to go and look at the information that we have available to us and look at how much rain might have fallen on Nantucket. So NOAA keeps a rainfall gauge, and the rainfall gauge for us is at the airport. And the rainfall gauge at the airport recorded just a fraction shy of 2.5 inches of rainfall in a 24-hour period. That main week, 2 weekends ago. But that's not the only information we have. So I also contacted David Gray, because he keeps two rainfall gauges. I'm so used to saying tide gauges, I apologize. He keeps two rainfall gauges at the two sewer treatment plants at Surfside and in Sconset. The one information he has is that that he emailed me was 3 inches fell at Surfside and 3.25 inches fell at Sconset. So if you put the airport in the middle of that at 2.5 inches, you can see a bit of disparity, but it's a hell of a lot of rain still to fall in a 24-hour period at all 3 locations. And I must note for the record that the only one that I can confirm and the one I have supporting information for is the one at the airport, the 2.5 inch. That's the one supported by NOAA. So I'm just going to put a few images on screen now, if I may, to give a bit of an update on some of the worst impacts from erosion from Hurricane Fiona. Can everybody see this okay?
Yeah, Vince, before you go ahead, Sarah has a question.
Cool.
Hi, sorry, I had to turn my video off, but yeah, just for future reference, Vince, at Linda Loring, we have a NOAA COOP station, and so we also have NOAA rain gauge data. I don't know 2 weeks ago off the top of my head what it was, but last weekend we had 4 inches or around 4 inches. And then the other thing I'll just note is that there are several rain gauges around the island that are part of the COCORAS program, and they are very regimented about when you collect the data. So it's very regulated, and everyone has the same type of rain gauge, so more comparable to the airport. Just another source of data that's free and readily available.
Perfect. Can I get on to you after to learn more about this, because I don't know much about it, quite honestly. And
Yeah,
try and include that
definitely.
in more updates, please. Brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. Greatly appreciate that. I'm kind of looking forward to new info. Okay, so can everyone see on screen at the moment?
Yes.
Just going to move a few things around, just make this into presentation mode. So you might remember that last December, Morgan and I started implementing one of the recommendations for the coastal resilience plan to have erosion monitoring stations. We're using the absolute basic technology at the moment of some stakes in the ground and pulling tape just to get measurements to within 1 foot. We're still pursuing purchasing a proper survey level GPS piece of equipment so that we can get way more accurate information. But still, the information I have to show you today is striking, to say the least. This is one of the worst places affected recently by Hurricane Fiona, is when most of the impacts happened here at the sewer treatment plant down at Surfside. So we have 3 locations that we measure at. We have SA, sewer A, B, and C. A is right next to a public access point. B and C are kind of the 2 closer beds to the shoreline, hence why they were chosen. So the way that it works is at each one of these locations, we have a number of different stakes in the ground for redundancy. So so 1 through 4 here, and then at sites B and C, it follows the same format. So we've got stakes further in, so that if SA were to wash away, we can continue to collect results from 2, 3, and SA1 gone. So 2, 3, and 4, we still can collect data. So we did lose something in a storm over the winter in January, but I also have a table to show what we have for each of these 3 locations. So we did pretty regular monitoring over the winter, and then we did sporadic monitoring over the summer, and nothing changed. So I got rid of a whole bunch of pointless data in the middle, and then just went with August as a pre-storm check, and then continued from there. So instead of, this is my way of knocking out a whole bunch of zeros and making it fit on a page. So basically at SA, the one closest to the access track, in 2 different lots, we lost quite a bit. There's 34 feet gone. The storm in January took 10 feet, and then Fiona took 24 feet. So cumulative loss in what, 10 months, 10 and a half months, 34 feet. And then at the 2 close to the beds lost 25 and 15 respectively. And if you want, I can just go back and show the image that where those sites are. So you're losing your majority furthest to the east, 34 feet, 25 feet, and 15 feet. And by the way, I'm happy I have extra stakes, because everywhere that you see the word gone, we've lost a stake. That represents a 20-foot loss. These stakes are generally at 20-foot increments. So yeah, pretty severe, interesting data, and shows that, well, first of all, the program is running and working. And then at some point in the next couple of months, once we have a year's worth of data in December, January, that kind of time, I want to find a way of putting this on the town website for all the stations I have.
So Vince, you said you eliminated some points. So was there actually a measurement between August 26th and October 7th that got taken off the chart, or was that August 26th the most recent measurement?
August 26th was the most recent. It was the pre-storm one. We did lose a bit of time. There should have been a September one. Unfortunately, Morgan was on by herself because I took 3 weeks off.
Yeah, because I'm just wondering, how can we attribute the loss to the storm specifically, as opposed to other activity?
Well, I have photographs as well from David Gray in particular. He's checking these more regularly than I am. We get to check them once a month, thereabouts. We try and aim towards the start of the month. But I lost time in September. That's on me.
Well, no, I mean, the sand is gone. So,
Yeah.
but I'd just be curious if we can show, if we had a October 1st measurement, we could be more confident that it wasn't a beach party over Labor Day weekend that caused the problem. Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So I got to say how this works. So where we measure from the stakes, we measure to the bluff line where it drops off. It's not to like the high tide line or something.
No,
like
I understand.
That. Yeah. So well, and it's consistent along the whole line. So I know it's only 3 data points, but when you watch the whole coastline go backwards, it's frankly terrifying.
That's actually what gave me the idea, is because the October 7th measurement, only the one stake lost any noticeable amount of frontage. The other 2 looks like it's 2 feet and 1 feet. as opposed to 24. That's a significant
So this
change.
is, yeah, that's the cumulative. This is the big one. Oh, beg your pardon. I'm sorry. That's the big one there. And then, yes, they only lost a couple of feet each.
Yeah, so that's why I was wondering, given that it's a public access point, would there have been would there be potentially some damage there from the public using that access point rather than from the storm?
So when you're on the ground and you're standing here, do you see how we have this red line here for where the coastal bank was as it was in December of last year? And then Morgan was able to roughly mock up where it was in January. If we were to repeat this and use the new information, so this stake is gone. This bed of Rosa rugosa, which is where one of the stakes was, is now halfway gone as well. So it would be the equivalent of moving, say, this blue line in to roughly around here, as roughly speaking.
Mhm.
So, and the whole beach looks like that. It's a sheer line going north, east and west, hard to say. 30 yards, 50 yards to the west, and about 80 yards to the east. So it's consistent with the local sporadic erosion. So it's taken a huge chunk in one area, but the way the erosion works is sporadic, it's not even. So you go down the beach to SB, you've only lost 2 feet, and that's much lesser amount of erosion. But in the past, that has lost several feet by itself, again, showing the sporadic nature of erosion in localized forms. It's not consistent along the whole beach frontage, never has been.
Right. No, and I appreciate that you have multiple monitoring stations to give us the picture.
Oh, and sorry, I forgot to answer your question. We purposefully went about 20, 25 yards in from the track.
Mhm. Okay. Peter?
Yes, Vince, can you put the screen back up that had the 3 points on it and show the sewer beds? So do you have a measurement of what the distance is between the beds and these 3 spots? I guess SC and SB would be most crucial.
Yes, not the beds, the fence line.
Okay,
So I know where the fence line actually got totally rebuilt over the summer because it got destroyed in a storm in January. An ice storm that all the fence accreted with ice, just built up in it. The wind blew it, knocked an old fence over, but they built in the exact same spot again, which was very useful for me. So where the fence line is, I've got the measurement to there, and that's a consistent point.
and do you know what that measurement is? Do you have it on hand?
Off the top of my head, hang on, I don't think so. This just shows loss, but I think
Okay,
in this one here, when we first measured it, it was kind of in the 140 foot range. And I think it's down into the 114, 115 foot range type now. I'm trying to remember, but I do have the original measurements. Morgan has them, and I'll get them to you for the next meeting.
I'm just wondering at what point does David Gray, I'm sure this is on his mind all the time, but at what point is he like, oh my God, and what is his plan? I mean, how many of those settling beds can we afford to lose? And does he have land that he can shift them onto? Probably not. So just, how is this going to affect our sewage treatment as the island continues to grow?
So
Actually, Peter, I have heard, and Vince may have some more information, that they do have a plan to create 2 new beds should we lose the 2 closest to the shore. And they do have an area set aside for that there. Vince, do you have more concrete info?
yeah, that's what I was going to say. And it's north of these 2. That's all I can add to what you said, Mary. These 2 here, it's to the north of them, where they might add more. Only to say another thing as well, Peter is like, at what point does David Gray say, oh my God, hit panic mode? He's pretty close to that, and we talk regularly. The other thing that I know is that some of these beds are way more used than other ones. The ones up in this area and up in the kind of northern part of the plant are way more used than the ones in the southern part. In fact, at the moment, there's a couple of these southern beds that haven't been used in quite some time. They're maintained as possible future use if ever needed, but they haven't been used for quite some time, as I understand it. And I think a couple of these beds are actually being used for storage for pipes at the moment, just showing that they don't ever have to flood them and use them. So I am not the expert in this, but I'm just going on the observations that I've had while I've passed through this area. And in passing conversations with David as well. But he is worried. He certainly is. He has a plan for where he might go next. But he said if we lose one or two, it's not the biggest problem.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vince.
It's Matt. I think the
Uh,
same thing though, because if we lose one or two, we're not far away from losing 5 or 6 more. You know, unless we're willing to hard armor in some manner the sewer beds. And that'll be a discussion that I hope that this group has at some point, you know, because otherwise if that's something we aren't going to be willing as a community to do, you know, armor it in some manner, then I think we have to be seriously thinking about where do we move it? You know, where in Mid-Island, where at high ground do we move this? And then are we really spending all the money to run all the sewer pipes to this if 20 years from now we're going to have to move it? You know, I think our thinking should be 20 to 50 years out, you know, as a group, maybe 100 years out. But that's all.
Thank you, Matt. Peter, did you still have your hand up for this topic, or can I go to Jen?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Jen? Did we lose Jen? Vince, do you see Jen in the participants?
I do not.
Okay,
But I know Ian's just put his hand up, if I might, briefly.
Yeah.
Just to say, we do have a thing in the Coastal Resilience Plan, Surfside Wastewater Treatment Facility and dune restoration. And I'm trying to work with David and some of his staff, the Assistant Director, Charles, to see what we might be able to do to get this project underway. So it's one of the hit list ideas.
thank you, Vince. Ian, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. So building on what Matt had to say, you know, perhaps it would be better for the town to start to budget for, at the minimum, choir roles with dune restoration. And, or, you know, there's the data from the geotubes and how much sand would be required, because I would imagine that if it came before the current Conservation Commission, those would be the discussion points. And, you know, the sooner the town starts putting money aside for that, the better, because I agree with everyone that it's obviously with those sort of erosion rates, it's going to become an issue front and center fairly soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Christy?
Yeah, just to Matt's point, which I think is a good one for us to keep in mind, even if it is 20 years down the road, whether it's protected somehow or some plan for securing property in the area to expand into those areas that are a little bit safer, considering that we have committed all of our plumbing to go in that direction. My other question for Vince was, I'm sure it's minimal, but have you found any situations where the beaches have accreted?
Not especially, no, I'm sorry. The south and east facing shores are way more of erosion zones. The only place where I could say that there has been a bit of accretion, and I know it just won't last long, there's a few areas around Mitigation and going out Smith's Point that have collected sand, and around Sheep Pond Road as well, that have built out beach width, but that we don't measure beach width so much as when in this erosion monitoring, we measured the coastal bank edge as the kind of fixed point that's retreating. But when you have more beach in front of it, the chances of an area erode, the coastal bank eroding become less over that winter. So that's nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That's a great question. Gary?
Maybe this is what Vince was referring to before. Did we, I recall in our coastal resiliency plan, we did worry about this part of our infrastructure because it's so important to the island. And did we not come up during the plan with some method of dealing with the potential harm coming from these erosion and rising tides? And is that one of our top 40 projects that are on our list as the most important things to get done?
If I can, Mary?
Yep.
Simply, yes, Gary, that's what I was referring to before. That's what I'm talking about now. I'll go you one better. It's in the top 40 and it's a priority 1 project.
Great.
We had priority 1, 2, and 3, and this is a priority 1.
Great, thank you. Jen was able to rejoin us. Jen, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Mary. Sorry about that. My internet just completely poofed right as you called on me. I just wanted to point out and say, Vince, this data is really good and really interesting. And Mary, it was your question quite a bit earlier about thinking about whether it's, from a storm or the timing of the data. And the way Vince has this set up is pretty consistent for how people are tracking, bluff retreat and trying to tie it to, what's happening with a storm. I thought your question was really good about, how people are interacting with the data, but this particular road, there's no driving access all the way down there. And so having watched what the water does to that bluff, it doesn't surprise me that was the hot spot this year. The only other thing that I've seen people do, we've kind of debated about it a little bit because it's the monthly snapshot of data and how does that give you exact storm interactions, and it's hard to get that exact data point unless you're going out, say, the day before the storm and doing it, but that's only if you have the people and the time. So a lot of this environmental data, whether it's erosion or water quality or stuff like that, you just take your monthly data points and use that as your benchmark for looking at when those environmental impacts happen. So it's that's kind of a pretty typical assumption from data like this, that you could tie it to a big known storm. But I think it's really cool that you have this now, Vince, so that we can look at it after storms.
Great, thank you, Jen.
Yep.
Right, other comments or questions on the storm report and erosion? So Vince, by showing us the sewer beds, you're also saying that the other points that you're monitoring did not experience significant erosion over the year since January?
Other points did. This was just the most recent major erosion event associated with the 2 storms I was reporting on, Fiona and Ian. Other locations weren't as affected by Fiona and Ian, not even Mitigation.
Okay. All right, moving on to the next topic, a discussion of the resilience cycle. So Vince, if you want to put that resilience cycle graphic up on the screen. So short background on this, as I was looking at the reports coming out of Florida and the devastation from Hurricane Ian there, and I'm not the only one, I saw other people commenting, there were certain parts of Florida that for whatever reason experienced less devastation. So some were because they had solar power and so they didn't lose power because they weren't dependent on incoming feed. And some were because I think Matt noticed that an article where they had underground power lines and they didn't lose power. And so it occurred to me that in this resilience cycle, we've done a lot on assess risk and vulnerability. We've done a lot on plan and prioritize. We're working on implementation. We haven't yet had a hazard event here that has been of high significance, but Florida did. So what can we learn from their events to plan for our recovery in the face of an event here? That's kind of what I wanted to focus on in this discussion. So we don't have to wait for damage here. We should be able to take stock of what's going on in other places and learn from that as well. And I checked the hazard mitigation plan, and it didn't have a lot in there about recovery, but Vince pointed me to this table where they had done a survey of the participants in the planning process, and people prioritized important recovery actions. And again, I'll say that these are sort of immediate recovery, and these are things that you would do after, well, after any event, but these would be very short-term actions. And a storm like Hurricane Ian, I mean, obviously you do have short-term response, but there's also going to be a years-long response, sort of similar to when we had the sewer main break. And it's taken us years to complete the response to that incident. And so I also emailed some of the town administration and got a response from Chief Pittman about the emergency response planning that the town does. And the chief was kind enough to point out several ways in which the town does take a look at other events and try to learn from them, cooperates with the Cape, because any event that would be of the size of Hurricane Ian here would probably affect the Cape, and the Cape's ability to recover would affect our ability to recover. So there's definitely some planning going on. But I thought it'd be a really interesting conversation to talk about the bigger picture for recovery in the event of something large and island-wide or even region-wide. So other thoughts and questions on that? Christy? You're on mute, Christy.
I'm sorry about that. Just looking at this list, you know, as far as our model or our application, obviously, I think we'd be adding, you know, boat service restored, you know, flood. I'm not sure where they might have flood management in here, but, you know, water does sit downtown for quite a while with anything imminent. But just wanted to note the application of the boat service.
Thank you, Christy. I think that that's a good perspective. It's, you know, something that's larger than just a local short-term response. Sarah? And then Gary.
Thanks, Mary. So I haven't seen all the pictures from Florida and looked at all the assessments, but I do remember several years ago, there was at the Nantucket Coastal Conference, there was someone from Puerto Rico talking about those historic hurricanes from now. I don't remember how long ago it was. But one thing that we learned from that, or that struck with me, was the areas that were less severely impacted were the ones that had natural vegetation and diversity of habitat right in front of the waterways. So, you know, I think we've seen this in other areas. It's just like a further reinforcement of the idea that nature-based solutions have a really significant application here. I'd be interested to look at areas specifically where hard armoring was done and the types of hard armoring and how that compares to some of the different strategies used in different parts of Florida. I think that's a very direct thing that we can learn from those kinds of storms, and how it impacts either prioritization of our, resiliency applications, or thinking about, how it might change our response to things. But I also agree, when I was looking at this recovery action, I was thinking boat service as well, just because of, we saw or have heard a lot in Florida about Sanibel Island and how the bridge is out. And so it's going back to a ferry service and supplies and things. So, and that's an emergency response in that area. But, similar for us, like, what are those initial services? And lastly, I would say for that sewer main break example that you used, those first initial services that required, I think the Black Hawk helicopter that came out were like medical supplies. So not even injuries and casualties, of course, on this list are high up there, and restoring services, but that immediate additional medical needs that are going to be needed to be met as well. So those types of services. So
thank you, Sarah. We'll go to Gary and then Vince.
Thanks, Mary. When I looked at those reports of what happened in Florida, I noticed that a handful of communities that had underground wiring certainly fared a lot better, because their service wasn't completely destroyed by all of those poles being toppled. And my recollection is that we have some initiatives, or the town of Nantucket has in the past indicated that we should be doing that. And I guess my question is, is there any kind of information, or is there a procedure when new developments are seeking approval to be obtained? Is there a bias on our part, say from the planning board, that says, you need to put underground wiring? For instance, all of those buildings being built, that huge community by the airport, is that underground wiring, or is that poles like the old days? And what about the new ones? There's one on Fairgrounds Road, a new one. So do we have a bias so that the planning board has the ability to say, if you really want to get approval, we'd like, we insist that you do underground wiring to save ourselves from some of the problems that occur when these high winds destroy, the stuff on the surface.
Thank you, Gary. Matt might be able to tell us more about that.
Yeah, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mary, but I believe that all the new developments require underground. If you look, there aren't poles going in at Richmond and, all the new stuff is underground. Any new building downtown, any new, if you put I just did a small cottage for my daughter and that had to be underground. So I put that underground for, and Sheila's shop as well, both going to be underground. But the problem really, and we've been talking about it for 20 or 30 years, is that it's difficult to get National Grid and Verizon and all the different utilities to organize and work together and start putting the existing poles underground, and that's downtown mostly in the most dense areas of the island. They don't want to do it because of their rate holders, because of the work, it's expensive. We as a town, I'm not sure we want to pay for it, though I think we should be thinking about it because of the, sort of the positive that will happen once we do it. It's sort of a resiliency thing, and it would be, I think it's something that as a recommendation should come out of this group. We've had, over the years, people have attempted to improve some of the undergrounding, and they've looked at all the minutes and looked at all the other studies and looked at what people did 10 years ago and come to the administration. But it's one of those things that ends up a low priority, and it's very difficult to find a way to get it done. So, I wish I had a better answer, but it's something that we should be doing. They put money aside and did it in the 70s or 80s. They did a lot of it downtown, and then it just kind of stopped. So,
well, isn't that a perfect opportunity for CRAC to, take a leading role, at least in the recommendation? Our mission is to make sure the select board understands what should be the highest priority, and this is something that the town has talked about. And if it's just a matter of pushing these vendors, I think that we ought to begin taking a leadership role in pushing these vendors so that they start burying those lines.
Thank you, Gary. It's certainly been a topic of conversation for decades that I can remember. We've got a number of hands up. I promised to go to Vince, and then we'll take the other hands in the order that I saw them. Vince, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I'll be as brief as I can. So just looking at this list here that's on screen, restoring communications and making homes livable and reopening businesses, etc. There's a lot of those are the responsibilities of other agencies and existing agencies, and a lot are personal responsibility type parts to this, and where the town could possibly assist. But from the point of view of the committee, so to speak, I would ask a kind of a larger question that both Gary and Matt were hitting on. Sorry, Peter. So the bigger question in this is, if we've had a big event and other agencies are looking after these things, what's the responsibility of this committee? Perhaps this committee should be looking at things like bigger areas. So if there's been a storm that badly affected an area, I don't mean to pick on any one area, I'm just going to say downtown. The question then arises, should we have businesses and buildings at such a density in that area? Should we be looking at potential retreat planning? Is that the job of the committee, to look at greater retreat planning, greater planning in general, and looking at zoning potentially to reduce the impacts by reducing the density in those zones? This is the kind of recovery actions that Matt said it. They don't achieve, they don't get as much attention, and they get put on the long finger and are hard to get money for. But that is the point of CRAC right now, to implement parts of the CRP, and in the CRP we have retreat planning as part of it. So maybe that's something that the committee could work on, as well as recommendations for getting infrastructure underground, which is obviously beneficial.
Are you going down, Terry? Check the
Matt, you're not on mute.
He is now. Okay, thank you, Vince. Peter, and then Ian, and then I think I had Christy and Jen as well.
Yeah, okay, this question would be for Matt, but you know, when I worked for the papers, both the Beacon and the Independent, all that time I reported on the utilities having a decades-long plan to put everything underground, and every once in a while there'd be an update on what they've done so far, and so it sounds like they've stopped. I don't know. And the other thing is, you know, if we're putting the utilities underground and then getting rid of the telephone poles, something to consider is that you know, we've got these cell phone repeaters all over the island to make the cell service on the island much better. We take away the poles, then I guess we're going to have to find a way to replace that. But I would think that cell service would be crucial during an event and going forward.
Thank you, Peter. Ian?
Thank you, Mary. So I live downtown, and last year, as probably a lot of you have noticed, the telephone poles now have an added reinforcement shield at the base of the poles. And I went out and had a word with the two kids who were putting it in, and I said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Oh, we're reinforcing the poles so that they'll last another 50 years. And the pole outside my house is starting to lean." And I thought to myself, that is going to crumble like a piece of aluminum foil in a hurricane. And so I really think it would be very important for us to emphasize to the select board the risks that we face with the current infrastructure. And in fact, is there any reason why, as a committee, we couldn't advance an article at annual town meeting, if necessary, to set aside money to try and make some of those calculations?
So I'm going to jump into the conversation. Thank you, Ian. We have a item coming up, discussion of potential goals and recommendations to the select board. I think it could certainly be a recommendation to the select board that we more aggressively pursue or find some way to incentivize the utilities to put poles and wires underground. So that's an avenue that we can take right away. And you know, Ian, I don't know what the right more aggressive step would be, whether it's a town meeting article or some bylaw or something. But I think it's certainly an important point because of what we've seen in Florida. The resilience is not just putting back things the way that they were before. Resilience is thinking about how do we want things to be? What is the best state that we can be in? And if it's a state that we're not willing to make a change from the current status, that's one thing. But if that current status is changed by an outside force and it provides an opportunity for us to build back differently and in a way that is stronger, I think that's the definition of resilience. But you lose that opportunity if you haven't thought about it beforehand. So the questions that are coming out of Florida are, you know, should we be building back everything the way that it was, or should we be doing something different? And I've noticed that one of the things that was helpful in Florida was that Florida has some very strong building codes, and the communities that were built more recently with the more recent codes suffered less damage than the ones that were older. So is building codes an area where we need to look? And as someone mentioned before, is, you know, the planning board, do they have a role for you know, requiring utilities to be underground or whatever the other accommodations might be? So those are some of the things that are on my mind as I think about recovery actions and planning and resilience. We have a number of hands up. We'll go to Sarah and then Matt and then Jen. I'm sorry, Christy, I had you first, and then we'll go through Sarah, Matt, and Jen.
Okay. Yeah, I just, from my time on the Finance Committee and now on the Capital Committee, I've seen the proposed project of putting wires underground for a long time. It is hugely expensive. I think I remember a number like 60 million. But as we know, every year that will go up. But I also know that out on Yield Point Road, where it turns to dirt, this past summer, they did put the wires underground. I don't know if they've removed the poles yet, but you'll notice some boxes along the dirt road there. So I don't know if that was a private venture, but just something to think about, that there is, it is happening out here. And then also, you know, for our report, if we were to send in a report, I think that, you know, Matt's right, National Grid does push back a lot, and sometimes that is part of the holdup. I think if something was proposed a little more reasonably, even if the project took, you know, 15 years to do, it might behoove us to sort of propose something that is manageable for all parties and not too disruptive for the island. But the only disadvantage to that is that, of course, the cost will continue to go up every year that we delay.
Thank you, Christy. Sarah?
Thank you, Mary. First of all, Mary, I really appreciated what you just said about resilience and reminding ourselves that our, as the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee, that, you know, thinking of the recovery actions is really important. And I kind of got caught up in that.
Yeah, Sarah's having trouble with internet.
Also thinking about that, where can we make recommendations for resilience? And so I really appreciate your point. Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
We
Can
can
you
sort
hear
of
me
hear
okay?
you.
You can move on. I'm sorry.
No, I think we got a little bit of what you were saying. Thank you for chiming in on that. Matt?
Yeah, a couple things. If there's any letter that goes to the administration select board, it isn't enough to say, we should really do this, because we get tons of that. We should really do this, and, you know, select board and Libby figure it out. You know, because that isn't going to work. If it's coming to us, there has to be a solution, whether that's setting up a committee or whether we have researched the reasoning and found reasons why it's more, you know, it's going to cost us less to do this than to suffer a hurricane. We have to actually show the rationale and sort of the path forward. And then it's more likely to be acted upon. If we just say, hey, select board, you have to do this, it's not going to happen. One question I have is all the undergrounding that we're doing now, is that all waterproof? Is that all being put in place to handle water? I believe it is, but that's something we should check. And if it isn't, then maybe it's, you know, maybe there's a simple solution that would make it, you know, the way it needs to be. And that's, you know, the poles are easy to see. What's underground is less easy to see. So, but we should ask about that. Maybe we need it, you know, maybe the recommendation is we need an engineer, or we need a work group, or we need something to come up with the numbers to then put the article. So we have to really sort of think through, you know, how is the best way to get this done, or have someone help us figure that out. And I was going to say the same thing Ian said about those brown supports that they put around town. That was to get like 40 or 50 more years, and they acted like that was a great thing. And at the select board meeting, and I'm like, oh, that's not a great, didn't think it was a great thing. We don't want those there to begin with. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And to Matt's point, one of the opportunities that we have is that the hazard mitigation plan will come in for an update, you know, sooner than we think. It was adopted in 2019, but the work was done in 2018 and maybe even starting in 2017. It's supposed to be on a 5-year schedule. So maybe next year they start doing the work on the update. And to the extent that we can, I think we should strongly suggest that that it be expanded to include more pre-thinking about recovery actions and more planning in the community sense rather than in the specific circumstance. Not just things like adding the boat lines, but things like you know, being prepared as a community to be able to recover from a large event. I'll use as my example the couple of years ago when we had the power outage, not because of anything wrong on Nantucket, but because the station on the Cape went down. And I'm sure that they have made repairs there and reinforced that. But the point about the boat and the point about the cable, even if the circumstances on Nantucket are excellent, we are at the mercy of the circumstances on the Cape as well. And so our disaster recovery is dependent in a very large part on what happens on the Cape in a large event. And maybe we should be talking to the Cape about that and making sure that they remember that we are a priority and we depend on them, even though we don't live in their county. Going to Jen now.
Thank you, Mary. You kind of took the words out of my mouth, but I think this is a good discussion, and I like the idea of planning forward. If we're always reacting, we're never going to be a resilient community. And maybe one of the steps we should think about here is another conversation with the hazard mitigation planning team, maybe with Holly Backus, to talk about what are ways that we can help move any of her current initiatives forward if, you know, we're working in concert with the hazard mitigation plan. I'm sure that there are things on their list that we could be additive to, as opposed to working kind of, you know, in our own lane, you know, maybe two groups pushing an issue forward. You know, and as Matt said, it's more than just, we should do this. It's a, maybe here's a pathway that we can move forward to do something that's more resilient.
Thank you, Jen. And I'll just note, Holly was invited to this conversation, but unfortunately could not attend, and she regretted that. But I did remind her that she can view the recording and certainly offer any comments after the fact. Other hands. Joanna? And Matt, your hand is still raised electronically. I don't know if you have another comment.
Thanks, Mary. Last week, there was an article in the New York Times, I think post-hurricane, obviously, that talked about managing exactly what we're talking about. And basically it said, and I'm going to paraphrase, but I would encourage you all to Google and read it, or Mary, I'll try to find it and send it to you so you can share. It basically was concerned about spending taxpayer money to rebuild things that were in the area that it could happen again, right? And so I think that's what we're talking about. And how do we plan for what areas we're going to designate as no rebuild, from the perspective of how we choose to spend our money. And so I think that that's something that we need to tackle as a group.
Yeah, thank you, Joanna. There are a lot of conversations that I'm seeing about the fact that the way that we do flood insurance incentivizes people to rebuild, and doesn't even permit them to do something different. It's focused on putting back what was there before.
Yep, and that's exactly what this article said. And also it said that FEMA and other agencies were incentivizing people to rebuild in the same location, and that was a flawed plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I learned from the hazard mitigation plan process was actually that the more people in an area who have flood insurance as private individuals, the more resources are available in that area to recover from a disaster. And I've seen a lot of articles in Florida. Again, Florida is a high adoption for flood insurance because many people do understand that they need it. But high adoption is measured in the 20 to 30% numbers, not in what anybody would consider, you know, widespread adoption of flood insurance. And so we've talked a couple of years ago about the potential for trying to educate the public about things that they can do to protect their individual properties. And certainly signing up for flood insurance if you're in an area that is likely to be flooded is something that can be very helpful for you as an individual. The more individuals are able to take care of their own needs, the less the community has to expend to take care of people who need assistance and don't have other sources. So that's another option for us to pursue. Jen?
Thank you, Mary. Just a little bit of a follow-up. It's not even that FEMA and flood insurance incentivizes building in the same place, but it's all you're allowed to do. You're only allowed to recreate what was destroyed. So you can't be innovative after the fact, which kind of pushes this conversation towards being innovative ahead of the fact and looking at, as you mentioned, building codes or other ways that we can encourage adaptation now, so that if there is an event, then what does get damaged could be potentially replaced at something that is at a better spot than it is now, or potentially mitigate some of that damage ahead of time. So that's why we need to do this pre-thinking as opposed to the reactive thinking.
Yeah, I saw an article this morning that defined the word pre-covery. So instead of recovery, planning ahead, pre-covery. I'll send that out to everybody too. Just saw it this morning. Other comments, Vince?
I want to build on what Joanna was saying, because she's exactly right, and that's the point I was trying to make earlier. I just want to make another plug for the CRP, because the CRP has things in it about that might be considered exactly what we're talking about for pre-planning. And I'm going to make a big plug again for the updating of the zoning bylaws, and something that Fritz used to talk about as well as other committee members here, about getting sea level rise practices and information into zoning bylaws, so that we won't end up in this scenario too far down the road.
Thank you, Vince. Other comments? Gary? You're on mute, Gary.
Sorry, I'm still thinking about underground wiring, and maybe our committee should draft Lauren Sinatra, right? And just say, since you're the energy guru anyway on the island, and Crack is very much in favor of increasing the amount of underground wiring, is there something that you can put together to recommend a strategy going forward, which will cause a incremental increase in the amount of underground wiring that is taking place these days? She should be for it, I assume, but as Matt was saying, instead of just giving it to the select board and saying, you figure it out, here's our energies are for the town, let her maybe perhaps think about it and give us some recommendations as how we can increase one of the goals that we hope to attain.
Thank you, Gary. Ian?
I think Gary meant to say energy czarina, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay, further comments? All right, not seeing any. So the next item on the agenda is review of a draft letter for the select board to send to Mass DEP. So what's happened today is that Ian this morning provided an alternate letter. And I think the best thing to do here is to make that available to the committee members for review before we go into discussion of what letter will be sent to the select board. So with your permission, again, we'll punt this to the next agenda item. And I hope that if anybody has an issue with that, please speak up, Ian.
And I apologize to you and Vince that I didn't get it, to you earlier. And so until à la prochaine, as they say in France.
Okay, so moving forward, then the next item on the agenda, discussion of potential goals and recommendations to the select board to include with our third quarter report. So we have not yet written the third quarter report, but one of the items at the end of it is the potential for any recommendations that we want to make or questions that we want to ask. I'm going to try and pull up. So on our second quarter report, the requests and recommendations were, are there current or upcoming issues for which the select board would like the CRAC's advice? We request that the select board expand the environmental goal of the strategic plan to include implementation of the 40 recommendations of the CRP in the next 10 years as a specific goal. And we recommend to the select board that the town continue to make progress in the design thinking workshop Just Do It project list and intend to make more specific recommendations going forward. So that is what was included in our second quarter report. We have, the option to repeat those, to remove those, and to add anything we want to add. So I wanted to just remind people to be thinking about that. If there's any that people want to discuss right now, we can do that. As we mentioned, some of the things coming out of the recovery conversation might be things that we want to include. But this is not the final word on it. This is just to get you thinking about it. The comments or questions on that. If there are none, next item on our agenda is public comments. Are there members of the public that wish to have a comment at this time? Bruce Mandel joined us earlier and had a comment. Bruce, do you want to unmute?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, my comment pertained to an item on the agenda that's already been discussed and resolved. Thank you.
Okay. Other members of the public, you can raise your digital hand or unmute and let us know that you have a comment to offer. Okay, I'm not seeing any there. Next item on the agenda is new business and committee and natural resources reports. Do we have any reports from our member organizations or from Vince? Vince?
If anyone wants to go before me, I'm good. I have two things.
Why don't you go ahead, Vince?
Okay, so two minor announcements, just to show progress on a couple of things. We have the so the MCFRM and getting that on the town website. That's progressing. We have funds in Natural Resources Department. We've spoken to the company that organizes the town's GIS system, and they are happy to add it. It's simply a question now of us doing the purchase order and getting that across. That's the simple minutiae. I'm hopeful in the next couple of weeks this will be on the town website. This is super exciting for me, and something that will be massively useful for the committee, particularly when we get back to the sea level rise update for the select board. Second, I have an appointment with CZM to get feedback on our grant. It hasn't happened yet. It's next week, so I'm going to take notes on that and then be able to provide an update to the committee at the next meeting on what went wrong.
Great, thank you, Vince. Other reports from committees? Right, if there are none, discussion of upcoming meeting dates and topics. Our next meeting date is October 25th. So some of the topics that we have coming up, I've asked the Nantucket Historical Association to tell us about their plans for resiliency. They had done a report a few years ago, and they are looking at, specifically the Whaling Museum and the Thomas Macy Warehouse, but I think they also have other things to talk about. And they're also doing a project this fall with the WPI students. So hopefully they'll tell us a little bit more about that as well. And they are on tap for October 25th. Vince and I are working on sort of a 1-year anniversary after the CRP was adopted. Where do we stand on each of the items? So we'll bring that to the committee. We have the third quarter report that I just mentioned previously that we need to take a look at. And we have a number of things that will end up at the select board. We have the updated recommendation for sea level rise, which needs to get on their agenda. We'll have the third quarter report on their agenda. We'll potentially have this letter that we're talking about to Mass DEP on their agenda. So I don't know if all of those will show up on the same day. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, or spread them out, but those are all upcoming. And always happy to take topic suggestions from members of the committee. So let us know if there's anything that you want to put on the agenda. Vince, it's everything off the top of my head. Is there anything else that we've got coming?
No, you got it.
Okay.
The only thing I can add, even in just the most minor of ways, I've been assisting the WPI students who are working with Nantucket Historical Association, provided them with a ton of information, hopeful that they might present at some point at CRAC.
Well, they'll do their regular public presentation at the end of their project, which we can choose to attend, assuming it's available. I don't know that we want to ask them to spend time to do an additional presentation to us.
Okay.
But yeah, certainly if they want to, they're welcome to. Or if they, want to ask us questions, we could be available if their schedule suits. Gary, did you have a comment? You're on mute at the moment.
Just a question. Are there other grant opportunities that are pending now or that we should be taking advantage of? I mean, you know, one of the most important things we are searching for is ways to fund some of the things we want to do in the future. And I'm not aware of what grant challenges we are seeking right now. Is anything going on? Do we have town didn't give us another body to be a grant writer yet, I assume. So boy, Vince is doing that work as well. But where are we on the grant scene?
Vince?
I have nothing that I'm actively writing for at the minute. I'm waiting on one or two things that are going to come up in December and January from FEMA and MEMA.
Thank you, Vince. And we'll get to you in a moment, Joanna. Gary, you reminded me the other thing that I wanted to mention for upcoming topics is because we didn't get the CZM grant, we don't have a big juicy project on our plate. And so the question is, you know, what should we be focusing our energy on? And that's a question for the committee. And, you know, that may be something that's informed by the report on the status of where we are on all the CRP recommendations. But it's something to think about. Do we want to create a project to work on, whether it's, you know, public education or some other issue that fits with our mission, just to keep us focused on making things happen. So again, please think about that, everyone, and come back with suggestions. Joanna?
I just sent Vince the copy of the article from the New York Times so that he could share it with everybody. But I think that it would be really great if we could read that and then come have it as a discussion item in our next agenda. Like, how do we come up with alternatives or guidelines or recommendations or ways to influence how Nantucket looks at rebuilding in flood zones? And how do we affect change there? Right. I think that that's number one. And then number two, and Vince, I'm happy to do this with you offline if that is a better use of our time. But there is a grant that we should be applying for right now. It's from the Cultural Facilities Fund. It's in partnership with Mass Development. It can go to cultural organizations, municipalities, colleges, or universities that own or lease facilities, and you're eligible to apply. It's up to $200,000.
Myself and Holly are looking at it. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Just making sure.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out the applicability. That's the biggest question in it. Like, it's great to say who it's from, but when you look at the rules of the grant, that's what we're trying to figure out.
Right. Well, I mean, I looked at it too. I mean, I think that it could certainly apply to the Harbor Masters building, right?
Oh, I'm not touching that one. Oh, hands off.
I mean, it could apply to many things that we have downtown, right? It could apply to the steamship area. I mean, yeah, probably a different conversation.
Ian?
Could it apply to the UMass Field Station, where they're having a lot of erosion issues there?
Yep.
As an example of checking several boxes at once.
That's a private.
Other comments?
Oh, sorry. I just.
It's Sarah from outer space.
All right, Sarah's put herself on mute. Jen?
I think I can answer what Sarah, echo what Sarah was going to say, and that's that UMass is a privately owned property. So they would have to, or NCF would have to choose to go after that money. The only place that the town really has a connection over there is Pulpus Road across the Folgers Marsh, which is in the CRP and something to go after. But I don't think that this grant is appropriate for that. We've looked at it.
Thank you.
Hey, Jen. Anything further on upcoming meeting dates and topics? Gary?
I just want to say thank you, Mary, sending around that article on the Norfolk waterfront. I'm very jealous. They already have their barriers. They're starting to use them. They've gotten substantial funding from FEMA. Town has participated in some, and so that's what I keep thinking we should be doing, but it's it's not so easy to do, I know, but when I see communities like that doing it, because they're at risk, how could they be more at risk than we are? But anyway, the money's out there somehow. We just need people to figure out how to best apply for those funds.
I think it probably helps if you have a major US naval base in the vicinity.
Well, we got the Coast Guard. We got the Coast Guard right there in Grand Point.
There you go. Yeah,
Yeah, can we apply for grant money to fix up the lighthouse?
yeah.
Probably could.
Federal structure, no,
Yeah, federal, not municipal. Okay.
sorry, had to burst bubbles.
I was making that comment somewhat facetiously, but yes. All right, anything else? And if there's nothing, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Ian.
Second.
Thank you, Peter. Roll call vote, Gary Beller,
I
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Rachel Freeman,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Hi.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Chrissy Kickham,
Aye.
Joanna Roach,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you all for attending. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Cheers, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording.